Today, I'd like to talk about the world's two big countries, USA and China. I call them two strange bedfellows because their cultures are very different, but like it or not, they find themselves more and more interdependent on each other. Both countries are very vast continental countries. The US has about 0.3 billion people, while China has 1.3 billion. In recent years, the US has become the world's biggest debtor. It borrows a lot of money. China has become the biggest creditor. Let's take a look at the numbers. US imports from China in 2008 is valued around 338 billion. Exports 72 billion. And when you minus the export from the import, you get a trade deficit, which is 266 billion. This is a very big number. And because of all these deficits, China has earned a lot of money, and it has a big foreign currency reserve, well over 1,000 billion. With this large foreign currency reserve, China is quietly buying US Treasury bonds. Now, US Treasury bonds are just the borrowing from the US government. When they want to borrow money, they just issue these Treasury bonds. And China is quietly buying a lot of US Treasury bonds. In this way, they quietly boost their creditor position. Regarding investment in China, the US is investing about $4 billion a year. 4 billion, not $4. $4 billion a year on average. But this is not a big number compared with the total investment in China. The US share is only 10%, lagging behind countries like Hong Kong, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. Don't you know that Chinese consumers like American products? This is shown by the success of many US companies. Some of them are Avon, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and KFC. And while the US is buying a lot of consumer goods from China, China also buys tons of wastes and recyclable materials from the US. In this case, China is helping the US to reduce the stress on its environment. However, some scientists estimate that 20% of the air pollution in Los Angeles can be attributable to the polluted clouds drifting from Chinese cities all the way across the Pacific. So the pollution in China also contributes to pollution in the US West Coast. And one thing that is very interesting, you talk to many Chinese, nearly all of them say that they want to live like Americans. If this happens, can you imagine what will be the environmental conditions of the world? Now, what does the future hold for the world with a rising China with a population of 1.3 billion, 4 times as many as Americans? Well, we need to take a look at a simple logic. In order for the economy to grow, you need energy. So we can say if there's no energy, no growth. However, if we use a lot of energy to promote growth, we create a lot of pollution. And when there's a lot of pollution, it will restrain growth, and growth cannot sustain. In other words, energy is the most important thing if we want economic growth. So that means both countries need to have a good and efficient energy policy in order to promote growth. They have to cooperate in energy policy. However, for the last few years, we don't see this cooperation. We see more competition than cooperation between the US and China. Now, the world is watching very carefully to see how they can cooperate. If they still compete with each other, then we may be in big trouble, because there are two big countries that are waiting in the wings. India, 1.15 billion people. They are also developing very fast in the footsteps of China. And the other one is Brazil, another vast country with a lesser population, 0.19 billion. Let's try to see how these two countries differ in their energy policy. The US consumes about 1/4, 25% of the world's total supply of energy. However, energy consumption in the US is very inefficient, because you can say that there is no energy policy in the US, because this energy policy is hijacked by the oil lobby, big oil companies. And the country has no willpower to restrain its energy consumption, except when the price of oil gets very high. And you look at the imports of oil into the US, mostly coming from Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. And these two countries are not very friendly to the US. But the US is forced to import oil from them anyway, dependent on them for oil. And you look at their other aspect of foreign policy, the US is willing to pay with blood in Iraq. And they also believe that they can drill themselves out of the oil shortage. However, if we look at China, they have a realistic energy policy. They try to cultivate good relations with many big suppliers, including Iran, Russia, Nigeria, Venezuela, and Saudi Arabia too. And they are moving away from oil to other alternatives such as hydro, nuclear, solar, and wind. Nowadays, almost the entire stock of bicycles in China have been converted to plug-in electric bikes. And they also develop cheap solar panels to be used on rooftops. And if you look at the Chinese passenger cars, they have higher fuel consumption standards than American cars. Now, besides oil, we have to think about coal, because both countries have huge coal deposits. When you add their deposits together, it's equivalent to about 50% of the total world supply. We have to think about coal because coal is a very dirty fuel. Coal creates a lot of pollution and a lot of carbon dioxide. And you know that China is building one coal plant a week to generate electricity, because for them, coal is very cheap. Likewise, in the US too, coal is very cheap. But the US companies stress on clean coal technology. Why I put a question mark here? Clean coal technology is questionable right now because it may require more energy to create clean coal technology. That means it may not be worth it. So we have to wait and see to see how the clean coal technology can develop into an efficient one.